The following experience happened to me a few years ago when I was on the train home from school. It was around 10 p.m. at night and I had stayed back in a public library to study. One thing you should know is that my train line is really dodgy, and you can meet some truly weird people on the train when it's late. When I got into my carriage that night, it was empty apart from 3 women sitting on the opposite end of the carriage. Sat down and plugged in my earphones to watch YouTube. My train ride usually takes around 45 minutes, about 3 stops into the train ride, and the only other person who had gotten onto my carriage at the time was a man who was wearing construction clothing. He sat near the 3 other women, so I assumed that he knew them, but I turned my attention back to my video. A few minutes later, I noticed that the 3 women who was sitting on the opposite side of my carriage had moved to my side. I didn't really think much of it as I was engrossed in the video that I was watching. But that's when I noticed someone take a seat opposite of me. It was the man who had gotten on earlier. He asked me my name, but he was giving me a weird vibe, so I pretended like I couldn't hear him. I had earphones in after all. He then proceeded to tap my knee to get my attention. There was no ignoring him, so I removed my earphones and looked at him. He was a big guy, probably around early 40s, and he was clean-shaven. He asked my name, and so I gave him a fake name. He then asked me how old I was. I was in my school uniform at the time, so I told him. He reached out his hand and introduced himself. Not wanting to be rude, I extended my own hand to shake his hand. This is when things started to get weird. His handshake was super weird. His grip was abnormally tight and he seems to pull my hand towards him as he shook it. I quickly withdrew my hand. He then asked me if I had a girlfriend as he thought I was quite attractive. Alarm bells began to ring on my head and I glanced over at the 3 women who refused to even look over in my direction. Seeing as they would be no help, I would have to look out for myself. He then took out his phone and started showing me pictures of a girl who seemed to look around my age. He then asked me if I thought she was beautiful. Again, not wanting to be rude, I simply nodded and said that she was. He then asked me if I would be interested in marrying her. I started laughing, as I thought that he was really just joking around, but his eyes were dead serious, and he just glared at me. He repeated his question, to which I responded that I didn't even know her, and that it was a little inappropriate. He suggested that I give him my number so that he could arrange for us to meet. Now this seriously creeped me out, and I politely declined, stating that I was busy with school and that I wasn't looking to get into a relationship. As I said this, the train was coming to a halt at a station. I was still 3 stops away from mine, but I decided it was time for me to get out of this situation. I apologized that this was my stop, and that hey, it was nice to meet him. As I got up to leave, he extended his hand for a handshake and thanked me for talking to him. I didn't want to shake his hand, but I didn't want to trigger him, so I reached out my hand. Suddenly, he grabbed my hand and pulled it towards me. His eyes were full of anger. He then asked, "What? You don't want to screw my daughter? I will break you." I quickly broke the grip and left the carriage. As it was nighttime, there were always police officers patrolling the platforms. I rushed towards one of the officers and told him everything that happened. I then described his clothing and which carriage he was sitting in. While waiting for the next train, the same officer came up to me and told me that officers had picked him up 2 stations down and thanked me for letting him know. Although the officer asked for my details, I was never notified of what had happened to the guy. Still, I'm not overly shook up about it. I just never want to see that guy again. So this won't be too detailed since I was pretty drunk when this happened, but back when I was living in another city, I had gotten a text from one of my friends telling me to meet up with him at a bar that wasn't far from my apartment. At the time, so I decided a quick scoot down for a few drinks wouldn't be bad. Well, as many of you understand, a few drinks turned into plenty of them. So my friend told me they needed to use the bathroom and not to go anywhere. I tend to wander off when I'm drunk, so that's not the point though. As soon as they left, here comes an old man. The old man immediately starts scoping out the area and recognizes me being alone and obviously too drunk to really be there anymore. He starts talking to me about, from what I can remember, an old bottle of whiskey that he kept in his house somewhere. While I'm drunk, I'm much more trusted and social than I usually am, so I started talking to him a little bit and he bought me more shots. Meanwhile, my friend was trying to get around the people to get to where we were sitting. I think I was on my fourth shot when he picked up my jacket and offered to take me to another bar nearby. I told him no since I was still waiting for my friend, but he kept insisting that I should go with him, and kept on pressing, saying that his car was just outside. Meanwhile, I was beyond my limit and was probably a few more drinks from blacking out completely. You could tell visibly that I needed to go home and I couldn't handle anymore. Finally, my friend found me and I can't remember how they got me away from the guy, but they told me the entire time they were walking me back to the apartment that they were feeling as if someone was watching and following them from a distance. This story takes place when I was around 16 or 17. I lived with just my dad in a little apartment in a questionable area. It was the type of area that you wouldn't want to be out and about when the sun goes down. Up until a certain time, like 10 or 11 p.m., there would be a cop or two in the area patrolling and making sure that no bad activities were going on. I had a job at a restaurant in the city, which was about a 30-minute car ride and an hour-and-a-half train ride from my house. The train was a couple of blocks away from my place, and since my dad was always too lazy or hungover to drive me, that was my main form of transportation. I went to work at around 3 p.m. and would usually get home at around 12 or 1. This was my schedule 4 days a week aside from having school. I would see a lot of familiar faces on the train because of this, but we never really made conversation with each other. Until one night when I got out of work late because some idiot wanted to sit in the restaurant past closing. Thanks to them, I missed my train, and the next one wasn't scheduled to arrive for another hour. So, having nowhere to go and no money for Lyft or Uber, I sat there waiting. No one was around me when this older man showed up, kind of staggering a bit. I assumed he was another drunken hobo in the city, trying to catch a train to sleep in. Something about his face gave me deja vu, but I shrugged it off, thinking maybe that I had just seen him on the train here or there. He made his way over to me to my discomfort and started up a conversation. He wasn't slurring, but the way that he was looking down at me gave me goosebumps. He asked me why I was out there so late all by myself. I had to reply as to not anger him, but I mean, we were alone and he was close enough to me to pull out a knife or something. Anyway, I told him that I was waiting for the train and he asked which one. Now, the train was color-coded with a strip at the top to indicate where it goes to north, south, east, or west. I took blue, but I lied and said that I took green. He looked at the schedule above and saw that the green train was coming in 15 minutes, so he said that he would keep me company. For those extremely long 15 minutes, he asked me how long I had been working at so-and-so restaurant, and this made my blood run ice cold. I never told him where I worked. I just looked at him very timidly and answered, "For a year," and he laughed and he said, "Wow, it's already been a whole year, huh?" At this point, my skin was itching out of anxiety, and as soon as the green train came, I knew that I had no choice but to take it. I said goodbye to him and I thanked him for the chat, hoping that that would be the end of it. But nope. He suddenly told me that he took the green train too. So he followed me and sat in a seat behind me. My mind was racing about whether he was going to try and do something to me, like chloroform me or hurt me in some other way. But we rode the train in silence. I was trying to figure out how I was going to lose him. There weren't too many people riding the train at that hour, and our car was empty, unfortunately. As the ride went on in a menacing silence, I could feel him staring down the back of my head. I waited until we got to a stop where there was another person, and I was so relieved to see a woman sitting there. She wasn't boarding, so I immediately got off the train and the man followed me, as expected. And I took a seat on a bench next to hers, close enough to her to see and hear everything going on. hoping that she would catch on. The man noticed that I was sniffling, allergies and being out in the cold, and asked if I was sick. I told him no, but he insisted on giving me these weird pills he had that were supposedly cold medicine. I declined in a louder voice. "Sorry, I don't accept pills from strangers." This prompted the lady to look at us and I made eye contact with her. She knew now. Now this went on until a blue train came and the lady got up, giving me a look that told me to get on with her. So without explanation, I did. She waved me over to sit next to her, and when the man tried to follow, she said, "No, you go sit over there," and made him sit a couple of seats across from us. He chose the one where he could face us, and he stared at us the whole time. I was shaking and about to burst into tears. The woman leaned over and whispered to me that she had a pistol. I felt safer with her there. We whispered back and forth about what had happened. I told her where I lived and how I was worried that he would follow me home. She told me a friend of hers would be boarding the train soon, and when he did, she told me that his name was Ray. Ray was filled in about everything and agreed to escort me home. She promised that I could trust him. The two of them waited with me until I got to my stop. The man, still watching me, started to smile wildly, resembling the Cheshire Cat. He shouted, "This is your place, right?" To which I didn't respond and just gave the woman a hug and thanked her. Ray and I hurriedly hopped off the train, and as I looked back, I saw that the woman had pulled out her pistol and told the man to sit back down, even blocking the exit with her body. I finally let myself cry in relief. Ray walked me home and tried to calm me down by telling me about his job and his family. After watching me get inside the gates of my apartment safely, I thanked him profusely for his help. It chills me to think about how that night would have turned out if I hadn't met up with that woman and her friend. I feel extremely lucky to this day. I never saw that man again, and eventually, I stopped thinking about him, but in the back of my head, that creepy, aroused smile of his was burned into my mind, and I couldn't help but wonder just what else he knew about me. This happened yesterday after I had finished the night shift at around 3 a.m. I work at a store of a big fast food chain to pay for my university. Our staff changes frequently because of a lot of students and people working at our place, so you don't get to know each other very well. Everybody has their own social life, and it is very, very rare for coworkers to establish friendships outside of working hours. But still, you know the people on your shift in the night shift has particularly few workers. One of my workers, Jazir, started to get interested in me. Not that I noticed. I'm young and dumb and like being friendly, and it's important for later. Have a hard time saying no. In December of 2019, our store threw a Christmas party at a pub. I went and had a great time, but I also made plans for later that night. Because of that, I wanted to leave early, which made Jazir also want to leave early despite the fact that he needed nor planned it beforehand, which made me uncomfortable. Unfortunately, he didn't know how to get to the train station and I did, so I couldn't say no and I just let him tag along. When we arrived at the train station, it came to light that there was no train that he could take to get home. None. He didn't check beforehand. He did not ask me. He had wanted to tag along with me, that's it. Super uncomfortable. Instead of taking the train to the main station, he got into my train and only got out when I insisted that he changes trains at another big station. But oh boy, that was not the train of the title. In January of 2020, Jazir asked me out for coffee and I agreed. I thought, he just wants to be friends. He doesn't have any and can only rely on his coworkers. If something happens, I can just nope out of there. And so I went. First, it was okay-ish. We mostly talked about work-related stuff, because we don't share any hobbies. We are not the same age and we don't have the same mother tongue. Jazir didn't like talking about work and nothing more. He started talking about how different I was from other coworkers, how nice of a person that I am, and how good my charisma is. And then he asked if we could get to know each other better. I genuinely didn't want to and still don't. Jazir is not my type, neither as a person nor from his looks. Especially his looks, even if I sound superficial. While I'm in my early 20s, Jazir is at least in his early 30s. I have no problem with age gaps. It's a story for another time. But I am not attracted to men that like teenagers. Instead of telling Jazir a straight no, I told him that I was not interested in having a boyfriend. He didn't take me seriously, and he told me that he would change my mind. I told him that he wouldn't. He again was not really on board with that opinion, so I elaborated my opinions 3 times in German and 1 time in English to get it very clear. He always changes to English if he does not get something or he thinks he misunderstood, even if he had heard it clearly and just didn't like it. I mean, obviously my opinion is going to change if I explain it in English rather than German. We left the conversation with him still not convinced and me being really not interested in a second meeting. He quit soon after, and I foolishly assumed that I was free. But whenever he came to my workplace to place an order, he would ask me out to eat something, and every time I would postpone it with whatever I had said the last time, because of finals, because of travel, because of anything I could get my hands on. Then came everything with the pandemic that hit Germany in March, and I didn't see him anymore. I blocked him on social media in April and hoped that that was the last thing to happen. But oh boy, that was not the case. Today, I finished my shift at 3 a.m. and left with my female and other coworker to catch the next train. We take different trains, and so we decided to wait in the main lobby until we needed to go to my platform. In that time, Jazir approached. He had just finished his shift and was on his way home. My friend asked him which train he needed to get on, and he said that he was walking home. While the conversation went on, I got closer to my friend to get some space between me and Jazir. My friend didn't get the idea of how uncomfortable I was in this situation, and she just walked away. What did Jazir do? Well, he placed myself between me and my friend, right in my vision line. Every fiber of my body felt repulsed when he barged into my personal space. I decided that I could not take a private conversation with him and said, "Oh look, I need to go to my platform," to end it, but he followed me. Through the main lobby, through the train station, and into the elevator and into the train. I was internally screaming and walked through the train until I saw another person. I sat down in the row of seats next to me, and Jazir followed. As if every bit of luck had just left me, the other passenger moved seats and went away, so I was alone again. Jazir talked and I showed clear signs of not wanting to continue the conversation. I hoped that he would leave, but the train soon departed. Mind you, the train goes in the opposite direction of his house, and it's a 1-hour walking distance to my workplace. There is no way this man could get anything out of taking that train, except for following me and continuing the conversation. I was freaked out and told him in English that he was acting very weird. Maybe I could have used a different word, but English isn't my first language, and at that point, I only thought about escaping. I couldn't let him see my station or he could easily find my house. I don't live in a rural area, but at 3 a.m. there's really nobody on the streets, so him following me home was terrifying. I thought about getting off a station earlier, but then I would need to get a cab, for which I didn't have any cash on me, or I needed to walk the rest of the way and he could still follow me. I decided to get up at the next station, let him get out of the train first, and then just stay inside while the doors closed. It fortunately worked, but only after telling him clear that this was not my station. I would not get out and he would not get back in. I even held my hand out to stop him from coming back. He stayed outside after the conductor shouted at us to let the door close. So let's rewind a little bit. He is way older than me, but does not get the concept of me not wanting to be in a relationship with him. Whenever he doesn't like an answer, he switches to English, because it just might be me misunderstanding. He followed me 2 times into my train and almost home, without even thinking about how creepy that behavior is. So Jazir, please just leave me alone. I hope I never see you again. You really should get a point and stop being so weird.